Bon dia a tothom. So good morning and thank you for joining us today. Very glad you're here. Let me also thank the organizers of this meeting this morning. These are the GenTIC from the IN3. Ari, I don't know how to say it in English, sorry. And the Gender Equality Unit at the work. And yeah, I must confess, I wish I had such a training when I started dealing with the European project. And this was a long time ago at the FP5 call. And when I saw this gender section, at the time it was a gender section. And as maybe probably some of you know, I'm a physicist by training, so it was not easy to deal with that. And we were somehow a bit upset. But then some years later, we understood how important it was to incorporate the gender dimension in all the projects, in all research projects, and also in research groups. So, yeah, and during these last years, 6 years now, as president of the Gender Equality Unit at the work, I have the opportunity to contribute to that, but also to learn a lot of what should be done. And in case you don't know, our Gender Equality Plan has a specific area focused on how to incorporate the gender equality dimension in research and innovation with 3 strategic objectives. One is make gender equality a key part of the work's research and innovation strategy. The 2 is promote and draw attention to gender equality in research and transfer output. And the 3rd one is promote gender equality in entrepreneurship programs. Sorry. In fact, one specific action of this gender equality plan is train research staff to work the gender perspective into their research. And this is why we are here today. We have a very interesting morning. Starting with a keynote by Elisabeth Politis. She is an expert advisor at the European Commission and working at Porsche, a non-for-profit organization focusing on science and gender. And then it will be followed by breakout sessions where you will be working in small groups oriented to specific Horizon Europe topics. And then we will have also a final session with practical information from the support units at the work that will help you to successfully prepare and write and present your research proposal. So I hope you take advantage from this morning and this seminar, and most of all, I hope you enjoy it. And now we'll give the floor to Elisabeth. Elisabeth Politis, she will give this very interesting talk, how to integrate the gender perspective in your research proposal for the Horizon Europe funding program. Elisabeth, thank you very much for coming. Please.
Hello, everybody. Thank you very much. Sorry I'm so late, but really, I tell you, many very cold men in suits waiting for taxis out this way. Okay, so yes, Rachel asked me to talk about this. I must tell you, nobody really knows how to do it, okay? So anybody who does it well is going to be well ahead of anybody else applying for projects. So what I'm going to say is really from my own experience of trying to do this with projects, and we just had a project funded under power relations in energy transition, where we used a particular way of integrating gender perspective, and evaluators evaluated the project 15 out of 15 marks. So I feel proud of that, but I don't guarantee that this is the way, but it was really well received. So my organization has been working in this area since 2001. Okay, so that's a long time and hard struggle. And so when Horizon Europe came up with this 3 criteria, I thought at last we're moving in the right direction. So as you know, gender equality plan, gender dimension, and gender balance, okay? And normally, I was evaluator in a number of times for commission. Normally when people have those things to include in the project, they will just put a one paragraph and that's it, okay? And that is really not the way to do it now. So there is actually quite a lot of available information, pretty good. But if you look at from the perspective of the project that you're actually trying to write a proposal for, it is always a little bit too general to be helpful. It kind of shows you why it is important, but doesn't really show you how to put it into your own proposal. And I left you have access to this presentation, so I put all the links in there so you can go and check it out. But I put this here because this is really what the Commission favors. The Commission favors the gendered innovations approach. There is this recent report that shows about 10 or more example case studies, and there has been a workshop with some more discussion about what it means, the gendered innovation. So the gendered innovation approach has been devised to looking specifically on the research itself and the research content. So it doesn't really look into innovation or dissemination and so on. But it's still an incredibly good educational resource. Yeah. So the gendered innovations approach was developed jointly between the European Commission and Stanford University, Londa Schebinger, and right now it has evolved over time because it's been worked on since about 2011, but it has got this a number of steps, and it's very important to hold on to those steps. That's what we did for the energy transition. It does require quite a lot of effort, but that's what the Commission favors. Yes, they favors this kind of a systematic approach, and of course, they also favor the gendered innovation because they invested some money into it. So as you can see, you have to look at that from the point of view of the priorities, the research priorities and outcomes, the concepts and theories, and these days, how we even define gender, how we define sex, how we define the interaction between them, where does the intersectionality goes into it. So one can go through all those lists in relation to whatever project you are planning and then whatever you're going to be discussing later today, and try to see how to answer or what it actually means. And once you kind of get into the mood of doing it, you will actually find it's not so difficult. So the very interesting thing is that German Research Foundation, DFG, have come up about 2 years ago with their own strategy for integrating gender and diversity in research. This is really quite amazing because the DFG is a member-based organization with something like 150 science institutions in Germany. To achieving a consensus on a strategy was a real struggle, but also a fantastic success. I think partly because the president of DFG now is Katja Becker, and she's a biologist, and she could see the reasons why it should be. But it is not just for biology. They have examples for engineering science, natural sciences, life sciences, and humanities. And again, if you just go with Google and put DFG gender, it will come up, the link would come up. So it is really a fantastic example for other research councils around Europe. That is, if DFG can do it, then others can do it as well. So I think that maybe we are really moving now into the future where analysis of sex and gender is just going to be as normal as analysis of environmental impact or things like that. So DFG has got slightly different approach. They don't have this very specific requirement like it is in Horizon Europe, but they do ask about whether the proposal involves research with human subjects, animals, or any samples from humans and animals, tissues, cells, and so on. Then you have to have a questions, either yes or no. And then you have to, again, similarly to gendered innovation, similarly you have to look in relation to the research questions, the theories that you're using, the selection of research methods, and the collection analysis of research data. It doesn't really go into impact or dissemination and other things that the European Commission would be looking for. So this is the other part, which is really quite interesting because it, if you remember, the Horizon Europe had the thing about the gender balance. And normally people interpret gender balance is like saying, yes, in our team we're going to have a proportion of women and men. But that is not really the issue. The issue is whether it's actually who you have on the team is relevant to the kind of research that you are proposing, because if you well, I don't know, if you're somewhere in Netherlands but you're doing a project that involves I don't know, climate change in Africa, then obviously there will be questions whether you actually have the right understanding of the context. So in here, the DFG asks for to anticipate the applicability due to sex, gender, and diversity among the subjects, studied subjects, and that will be the reason for this will be soon apparent, and also among the researchers. So that's where the question that while in Horizon Europe, gender balance is a ranking criterion. Actually, if you're looking at it from the perspective of DFG, it could be very strong additional point to stress in a proposal that's a part, in addition to the gender dimension in the content of the project, there's also this additional strength by making sure that the team itself is the right team for the project. The NIH guidelines have also appeared. You will not believe it, but in 2011, they actually did not require projects to specify sex of the subjects that were studied, especially cells. And so that's changed. And there are now, if you are working with cells or tissues, you have to actually specify, and there are guidelines now how to do it. And basically also that it's important to use both males and females, because, as I will soon show, that has been really biased for using male subjects. Okay, so now some background to this. And the background is that in 2010, my organization was coordinating a project called GenSet. And we had this brilliant idea that actually we shouldn't talk to people who already are concerned about those things, that we should talk to people who don't know anything about sex and gender and how it affects science. And we got together 15 science leaders from across Europe. They were vice rectors of universities. They were really important people. We had 3 sets of 2-day seminars. We put the empirical evidence at front of them. And we said, your task is to look at this empirical evidence and to say, does it matter to science? We know it matters to women. Does it matter to science? So the first 2 days for the first seminar, there was nothing but the total denial, nothing to do with us. Yes, why should we think about this? We brought the best gender experts we could find, including Londa Schebinger and Theresa Ries. And so they were there to answer any questions. In the second seminar, suddenly, we had a big participatory ways of doing it. Suddenly, connections were being made between different topics. And by their third seminar, they have actually come up with a report. Every word in this report is written by them with the 13 recommendations for why sex and gender matter to science. And then, having gone from denial to total acceptance, they wrote a letter to the European Commission to say that the experience they went through should be available to more people, because evidence is overwhelming that this is really, there are lots of biases and gaps in knowledge, that studies tend to favor using male subjects or don't account for what subjects are, sex subjects are, or don't report the sex of the subject, or don't even bother to analyze the data in the right way. And so their conclusion was that at that point, in 2010, science had more evidence for males than for females, and therefore the outcomes of research will be often worse for females than they are for males. And indeed, you just have to look around that is the case. Okay? So having written the letter to the Commission, to their commissioner, the Mary Quinn at the time, suddenly that became, went on the policy for European Commission. So had it come from my organization, little one organization from Porsche, it wouldn't be so impactful. But it came from the 15 science leaders, including the editor from Nature. So I think that really worked. And there was then attempt in Horizon 2020 to do something about it, and with the now next step in Horizon Europe. The interesting thing, what they have concluded was this, that basically the interconnection between the institutional practices and processes, for example, in recruitment of people and awarding of people, between human capital, what you do with people once they are in the system, how do you take them to the leadership stages, how, given that gender equality is a principle of European Commission, why is it that governance of institutions is not also committed to gender equality? And science knowledge making, the actions. So they were interested in actions that improve the quality of research and of knowledge production, application, and communication. So basically, for the very first time, people looked at the quality of science knowledge and the quality of the system that produces that knowledge. So that was really the most interesting thing, and because then you can have a look that so the evidence that we put in front of them showed that there were biases and gaps all across for every step of the research process. And what they have connected this to is the fact that people who make decisions, they're dominated, so decision making is dominated by men. And so the question is how to improve the situation. So there's some, so this is the perspective from a science knowledge making. So the reason that they were worried about is, first of all, is that if you don't report the sex of the subject, or if you put the data together, because that gives you a better statistical guarantees, or if you just use one sex and not the other, basically you're producing research that cannot be reproduced. So for those scientists, for those science leaders, it wasn't the fact that one should be concerned about sex and gender. It was the fact that was the quality of research itself, of the studies, was negatively impacted on, and that many studies could not be reproduced. So if the studies don't actually contain the right analysis, they cannot be put together into meta-analysis. And as the evidence then came out, is lots of research is being paid for and can be reproduced. Amgen could not reproduce 47 out of 53 foundational papers in oncology. And this kind of examples are now activated interest in Nature and other journals, because really that is something that, if you think you have published paper in Nature, you think you must be excellent, but actually, if the right questions are not asked, the papers are not really as useful as they might be. So the question is, and that's the argument that worked for the Commission, is the argument was about the quality of science. So after the science leaders panel wrote to the Commission and says others should have the same experience, and as you know, every project needs to have a final conference. Our final conference was called Gender Summit. 450 people came to it from all over the world, and they said, we want Gender Summit as well, because you could bring into the room not just people who were concerned about social injustices and gender, but they were also there because they were policymakers, they were funders, and so on. So that was so the quality arguing for sex and gender analysis on the basis of quality of research. That's what works, we find, with science. And it is very easy. This is very easy for scientists, especially biology science, to kind of make biases or make research that is biased. If they're working on animal cells, and they get their cells from commercial suppliers, in many situations, as the sex of the cells is not specified. So if you see all those gray areas here, it's if you're buying cells, you pick up the phone, you want some cells arrive, you have absolutely no idea whether male or female, or they both, or just mixed. And so you start your experiments just thinking that's fine, that's not a problem. But actually it is a big problem. As the evidence now is coming out that you really need to know the sex of the cells you're using. And I once spoke at the, just totally by accidentally, at the conference that was on a regenerative medicine. And they only asked me to come because I complained that they don't have anything in the program to do with sex of cells. And the chair of the session was really very kind, and he was expert and had a lab with lots of people working in it. And so when I tried to explain to him, why is it that he does not really, they don't look at the sex of the cells. He says, well, we're using this particular medium to grow cells, and male cells grow best in it, so we just use male cells. So there was, unfortunately, someone else on the panel says, don't you think that they engineered this medium in order to actually work for male cells and not for female cells? Right. And also the problem of the quality is that we had a speaker at the Gender Summit who was an expert on brain, structural characteristics of brain, and there's this claims in society about female brain, females this, male this. Well, there is no female or male brain. Okay, we're not born with the brain, and then through exposure to the environment, learning, conditioning, and so on, then the characteristics emerge, but in a cognitive level, not in the structural level. But the thing, what she said was that there's a tendency among neuroscientists to overestimate the differences. So they find some tiny, tiny differences, and they suddenly translate this into behavioral characteristics, and they completely underestimate similarities. And when you're looking at the structure of brain, you really have to look at, well, according to her, it was all pretty similar, part of tiny little differences that do not translate into behavior. And also that if people use imaging, you can actually construct imaging in such a way that is demonstrates some characteristics, but it's very much to do with the settings on the equipment and not the real characteristics. So again, the consequences here is that if this research is then published in, say, in a social media or somewhere else without explanations, journalist or society picks it up and says, oh, okay, female brain obviously worse than male brain. There we go. Again, so just reinforcing stereotypes. So, but fortunately, certainly in health now, there's a huge amount of data coming up saying that there are differences between how the illnesses demonstrate themselves in women and men, the causes of it, and of course, there's a lot of effort trying to understand why, and it can go all the way back to very basic biology, to the fact that women have 2 X chromosomes and men have only 1 X chromosome. And although there was always assumed that the second X chromosome shuts down completely, but it doesn't shut down completely. There's always 15% somewhere that is expressed. So basically the component of genes on the X chromosome in women is bigger than in men. And they think that's why women have more autoimmune diseases, and that also can impact on other illnesses. So very interesting way to try to find out where is it that the differences matter. And of course, now with all that discussion about whether actually biology matters, whether it's all actually society, in the end, biology does matter, okay? And it matters because if we understand where it matters and how it matters, that does impact on treatments and designs of vaccinations and personalized medicine and so on. So it's just simply wrong to deny biology, okay? When one thinks about transition between people feeling in their own identity that they might not be actually have the sex that's been assigned to them. Anyway, so at least in health, plenty of evidence about the differences. But even so, in a lot of biological fields, there's still the persistence of not really looking at the studies, looking at the comparing males and females when you're working with animals or with tissues or with cells. And neurosciences are particularly bad, okay, on this. And there was a study about 10 years ago, there was a study that looked at the bibliometric analysis of a big bunch of journal articles, about more than 30 journals, and they showed this kind of results that basically the studies tended to use male subjects, so that means male rats or male mice, and basically did not compare to the kind of diseases that were there in the world among the humans. And so this study here repeated that particular investigation just recently and came up with basically not much improvement. Oops, sorry, not much of improvements, but they also looked at the reasoning that people gave for either including or not including the sex or gender analysis. Well, in this case was sex. And there were quite interesting excuses. This one says, because we have detected no difference in phenotype between male and female animals in past or present study of this animal model, results from both sexes were combined. I don't think this is a justification, okay? Because if you really look for the evidence, you can see that actually this data should never be combined. Okay, so basically, there's still struggles to encourage. Oh, okay. So this one is about reproduction. This one is about behavioral physiology. So as you can see, that's a really pretty good response to sex and gender analysis. So, so this circle represents the types of the excuses or explanations that people give. And here another one was, we use males exclusively in these experiments to minimize possible variability resulting from sex differences. Again, this is a red herring, okay? There are plenty of studies to show that this thing that females are variable, males are also very variable, all right? So it just cannot just do that. So this was an interesting study. So they took a question of understanding the case of maternal immune activation model. I don't really know what it means, but it's got an effect on offsprings, okay? So you can then study the offsprings to see whether maternal environment has affected the behavior of the offsprings. And the only thing that they looked at were the males, okay? So, and what they tried to actually puzzle out is whether the authorship of the people who were doing the experiments, what was their gender balance, and whether that connected with the actually methodologies that were used and interpretations of the results. And their recommendation was, we suggest exploring the possibility that by dismantling sex bias and male dominance in basic research, one would get an additional handle on favorably modifying the perception and appreciation for women in science. So basically, what they looked at is that what they demonstrated is a strong sex disparity with a major emphasis on male animals in studies examining behavioral and neurochemical alterations and MIA offspring. So basically what they're saying is, if it's men who are doing the studies, they will use male animals and in preference and interpret the results accordingly. And therefore what you really need is understand that this is actually a pattern, more frequently occurring pattern, and whether this will justify that actually you should have a gender balance and diversity in a team, because you ask questions differently, you see the context differently. So that was interesting. They don't claim that they have actually discovered the correlation. They just say that they are discovered possible correlations, and they are advised to have a look at that in more detail. So basically, we're looking at science that's supposed to be excellent. Scientists cherish the idea of excellence. Excellence is very rarely probably defined. In Japan, about 2 years ago, it was discovered that Medical University in Tokyo manipulated entrance exam scores for many years to curb female enrollment to 30%. Basically, they were worried is that they have more than 30% of women doctors in hospitals, and they all suddenly get pregnant. There's going to be a crisis in hospitals. Okay? So it's not just implicit bias and explicit bias, it's a kind of a complicit bias, yes? People agree on a particular practices without actually specifying them and without actually making anything transparent. And it was a huge furor over this in Japan. And now they made their president of Tokyo University Medical School, it's a woman. Okay. But I like this particular cartoon. Basically says our standards are very high. We even have high double standards. And I think that I always put this up when I talk to science leaders, because really you have to think that about the need for transparency. Okay. I don't know. Any questions right now? No. Okay. Well, let's keep going then. So the problem is, if you have a bias in knowledge, and that knowledge is then, of course, a purpose for applications, that bias is then translated into innovations and into products, okay? And that you can look around and you can may have many examples of products that's been designed for men with the thought that the users are men, and will not, and in the end they don't really work properly for women. and it's just across a whole range of situations. Yes, obviously I will show one or two, and that's again it's from a point of view of Horizon Europe is when you say where's the impact of my research, the impact, and you're suggesting that there's some applications areas, it's always useful then to say that is going to improve the quality of the impact of research. And I think it's also very easy for people just to ignore. They think that they're doing some sort of a fundamental research so they don't have to actually think about sex or gender, but it is very often motivated by applications in health applications or environmental applications. And so I think it should be really thought right from the beginning. So even if it's not directly in the content, it will be, if it's motivated by applications that obviously involve human beings or animals or environment, then I think it has to be recognized right from the beginning that there are potential risks and safety issues. Okay, so like in nanotechnology, for applications in medical context, people work on stuff that is clearly going to has got safety or risk issues, but they don't think about that, okay? Because they think they just, that someone else will think about that. But someone else will not think about it. So I think I think it has to be questioned all the time. Obviously, if you're doing something like in astronomy or particle physics, particles don't have sex and gender, so you think I don't have to think about it. But if the idea is that something's going to be done because you develop some ways of using radiation for investigating or in diagnostic purposes, that there's applications going to be in human beings. So here's one example about how things interconnect. Okay, so it's been shown that this speech recognition software works better for men than for women. Okay, the voices of women and men have different frequencies, and the reason is that the vocal tract is shorter in women than in men, and so there's a strong biological reason why there are those differences. However, especially in early days, speech recognition software was developed in labs full of men, was tested on men, worked fine for men. You would buy the package, you've been told, you have to train the software on your voice. If you are a woman, doesn't matter how hard you train, it will never work as well for you as it works for the men, because it was simply not designed to recognize the required frequencies. And here, even in Google, you can see the recognition. If you speak and it produces captions, it works much better for men than for women. And it's important. It's not only important because it shows the ignorance and the worse quality for women in outcomes, but the fact is that, especially in a health context, it is women who have often used this kind of a software. When you're doing x-rays, when you do something, you're talking, it's recorded, yes, and then it's used as a part of the evidence for the patient, yes. And the errors are much higher, in transcription errors, much higher in women. So if you think about collecting data on patients and there are all those errors in it for women, it's really quite a worrying thing. So, and there are many other things. If physiological models are based on studies on male rats, on male mice, and then or men, because you recruit men students because they're young and they're strong and they're willing, then you have physiological models that are then translated into all sorts of gadgets, yes, that measure these physiological factors and might not actually measure them appropriately for women and for men. So if you have some gadget that monitors your level of stress, yes, and says, careful because you're about to get a heart attack, how do you know that it actually is giving you, as a woman, the right reading and not because whether the model was tested, whether the gadget was tested on women and men, young women, old women, young men, old men, and so on. And there is no requirement at present that they should be, because they are not medical devices, they are kind of a health devices, and so you're buying them and you trust them. Oops, sorry. Okay. And the interesting thing is, when I said that biology matters, well, it matters in a really important things that people have studied different kinds of tissues in a human body and try to check whether the expression of the genes differs between different tissues in different parts of the body. So not only that it differs, but it also differs for men and for women. So there are some very, very elemental differences that might play a role if we're trying to understand, the accuracy of the devices. This one is interesting. That was described at one of the gender summit. It's of the apps for monitoring whether you're going to have a period or not. And there are lots of applications like this. And obviously there are lots of women use them. But what was discovered is that if you use them on your iPhone or on your phone, it automatically, the information went to Facebook, even though you were not signed up to Facebook. And it is really now critical in the United States because, in many places abortion is illegal. And if you have this app and the information goes to some public space like Facebook, and it shows that you didn't have a period for 3 months and suddenly you had a period, you might be actually accused of having had abortion. So this is really dangerous things that are happening, and that could be more harmful, directly harmful to women. One thing that I really am interested in is about the sex differences in risk of cancer incidents, because radiation dosimetry was developed originally because for people who worked in the nuclear power stations who were men. So it was done to measure the dangerous level of radiation that would harm a man. They didn't look at the fact how it would harm, whether it would make the man unable to have children, but that was not considered. It was just sort of a general health, and certainly didn't look at women. It's called a reference man. It's still used in the United States. It's called reference man. But interesting thing is, while we talk about gender and sex, is that the spontaneous cancers incidents are higher in men than in women, okay? Like factor of twice. But an exposure to radiation, you go to the dentist, you have a scan, X-ray, you go and have your mammogram, you have an X-ray. As a woman, you fly in airplanes, you're exposed to X-rays. We have absolutely no idea. There are no models that do this cumulative exposure to radiation. But what is quite clear is that women are much more sensitive to exposure to radiation. So next time you go to the dentist, don't do that to the X-ray, okay? And there are a lot of studies now looking at mammograms. I mean, how often it is you should have them. Obviously, you should have them, but should you have them? Is it right to do them once a year, twice a year, every 3 years? And it's got, I think it was in Germany. They developed this. We know how men also get breast cancer, okay? And if a woman does have a mammogram, it's really pretty unpleasant experience because they are not really made. These machines are not made for comfort. So people in Germany thought they're going to have one that you just lie down. but it's using a CT scan. So you're actually exposed to even more radiation. Okay. But in Bristol University, they were developing a way that you would lie down, and they used the idea that you have like 20 tiny radio antennas that scan the breast, and they trying to detect a difference in dielectric constant. And apparently that is different in cancer tissues and healthy tissues. And this sort of a thing could be then put in any surgery, doctor's clinic, and it will be very quick, takes only about 7 minutes, and it's safe. And I'm really surprised that it's not everywhere, but it isn't. And there are lots of examples. I mean, I say, if we have evidence for health, there's lots of also examples in health about different gadgets and devices that are being designed for men. Men have a bigger hearts, you know, that's what everything was done. Sort of assisting devices were designed for men. Hip replacements, originally they were also designed for men. You know, women have a slightly wider hip, so it should be like this and not like this. So frequently they didn't work, but also now the failure rate in women is higher than in men. And a lot of it to do with the materials that are used on them that actually women might be more sensitive to. Simuloscopy, I mean, colon cancer, you can have an early diagnosis of it, but the probe that was used was designed for men, so it didn't reach, and the early signs of cancer in women appear a bit further on, so it didn't really show that, so it was very inaccurate for women. It was more accurate for men, until someone in a Northwest University put a little light at the end of it, and it showed a light higher up, and it could show whether there was more blood vessels appearing in different parts of the colon. And that improved accuracy tremendously for women. Well, we just gone through COVID, lots of vaccinations and the flu. And that's an interesting thing that here they actually looked at what happens when you have an influenza vaccination, what happens at the molecular level. And there are big differences in the molecular level. And what they came up with is that not only you have to understand the sex differences, you have to design the sex differences to improve the effectiveness of the vaccination. And then you have specific vaccinations and how you apply them as part of public health. And if you think cases like Ebola virus, pretty dangerous to women and men, but it is women who are the health providers, women who in Africa who have the responsibility to prepare bodies for burial, so women would be exposed to these viruses much more. So they should be given the vaccination first. And also because the women are more sensitive and responsive, the immune system responds more quickly and efficiently, effectively, then I think they require a smaller dose. So in a sense, you can win in terms of public health, you can really win here. And again, it's a work in progress. So this is a situation where I feel I had a personal success. I always look at examples of like anything comes out, say sex, gender or something, I go through and I scan looking for how many times the report mentions sex and gender. And if it doesn't mention, I will write to people, says, why don't you mention sex and gender? So, so here was guidelines on stem cell research and clinical translation, published in 2016. there was no mention of sex and gender, okay? Even though it was all about basically how you're using stem cells. So I wrote to the people who produced this report, those guidelines, and that was their response. This issue was not addressed in the guidelines for the simple reason that among the many members of the guideline task force, as well as in the public comment period, this issue was not, to the best of their recollection, raised. Well, it's not true. I wrote to them. I will confess not knowing much about this issue. My focus has been on the ethics. It is possible the state of the science or awareness of this issue was different at the time of guideline writing. Well, we're talking here 2016, okay? That was already when NIH was asking for studies to look at sex of the cells. However, in 2021, the new version has arrived and is actually explicit statement that sex has to be included as a biological variable. So I feel it's my success, but I think it might be NIH's success. Okay. And I think we need to go beyond when I say that, bias in knowledge has got impact on the bias in how we use the knowledge and for what purposes and what comes out of it. And it goes beyond, products and technologies and so on. It goes really about development. So here's a study from Elsevier. They looked for a share of publications that included sex and or gender for each one of the SDGs, okay? And for about 9 of the SDGs, there's a very little research that looks at sex and gender, and some of them, like clean and affordable clean energy, SDG 7, is only 1% of the studies included consideration of sex and gender. I just found it so dramatic that it just became my own favorite topic right now. Because the SDG 7 itself says increasing access to affordable energy, okay? Now, access is a gendered word, okay? Someone controls access. Affordable is a gendered word, yet SDG 7 has got no gender indicators or gender targets. And finally enough, all those SDGs that lack research that looks at sex and gender are exactly the same SDGs that have no gender targets or gender indicators, okay? So there is a relationship about, it's a real concern about implementation of SDGs and the fact that are women going to be left behind? Because at the moment it looks seriously that women are going to be left behind. Okay. Questions? No. No. Okay. Keep going. I don't know how much time I have. Okay. So we're actually moving in the right direction. This is a very good infographics from Canada. It looks at intersectionality in STEM. It looks at all the possible situations. I strongly recommend that people have a look at this. This is something I created early on just to show people, how sex and gender might interact at different levels. And of course, it all has to be taken into consideration that there is a society, there are cultures, there is a physical environment. As I earlier mentioned, the maternal internal pregnancy environment and what happens, behavior of the offspring. So it can go at all different levels. It can also go, this can also be applied even for application of SDGs, pollution from non-clean energy and the roles. So women spending hours collecting wood, using unsafe stoves, having exposed to the pollution. So and then you have a destruction, of course, of the environment. So one can look at that in many different ways. This is a really interesting analysis from Queen Mary University of London team. They looked at COVID and actually intersectionality in what happened during COVID. This is only a summary. I strongly recommend that you have a look at this because it actually goes in detail about different factors that were recognized, that how people were exposed to COVID, what happened to them, and variations, poverty, where they lived, male and female, and so on. So that was really very interesting. So this is the example that I used when I talk to people who don't come from a medical or anything or scientific even areas, because I think that for me that captures like all the possibilities. So this is about road safety and mobility. Roads were designed for men, okay, because men used to drive, they used to go to work and home, so they are, that's the anticipation. Sorry. So yes, so roads were, roads were designed for men. Women and men use roads in a different way, because if you're a woman, you do lots of short trips, you drive more slowly, you take mother to the doctor, you take children to school, you go stop at the supermarket. That's again, so this kind of a designs don't suit you. Of course, the mobility of people who are not drivers is not considered. Strangely enough, there was a study in I don't know, sometime early 2000, that looked at the 25 years of car accidents in America, compared what happened during crashes, effects for women and men. They concluded that women had a 47% higher risk of injury in a car crash than men when they're driving or wearing a seatbelt. So that was quite critical. People complained that basically took together data from old cars and new cars, so a range of cars produced during the 25-year period, so maybe the figures were not so bad. But a study in Sweden looked at cars that were produced since 2009. So what they found is that they were 55% better for men, but 73% worse for women. And the reason is that they were designed again for men. The seat has to be hard to keep the men in the place, because they drive fast and they are likely to be killed. So you have to stop them being killed. So you strap them in and they're fine. They are not good for women, okay? So that's definitely so. So obviously not good for pregnant women, and the data. So nearly up till now, cars were tested with male crash test dummies. The biomechanical model inside was based on the body of a man. There are differences between, especially in the spine. Of course, women have smaller bodies, smaller bones, and so on. But the vertebrae in the spine are separated by bigger distances. So three things happen in a car crash. The car goes into the barrier. Crash one, your body crashes into the car inside, your second crash. And then all your organs start bumping inside. That's a third crash. And that's where the most damage happens in women's bodies. So it's a bit like being on a trampoline, which is body shaking up. And so the injuries that are in the real car crashes and injuries observed in the labs, but where the crashes damage just didn't match for women. That's what you need to look like if you want to be safe in a car crash. That's a sort of a dummy made up in Australia. It's called Graham. So basically that will protect you from all sorts of all different injuries. This is the first female crash test dummy. My friend Astrid Linder was instrumental to produce this. This actually is proper female crash test dummy. So it's not a mimicking, it's not mimicking a male crash test dummy by shrinking it and putting a false sort of brown then. It is a proper female crash test dummy. So hopefully. But the important thing is that if you look into prevention of injuries. If you look at the prevention of injuries and what happens, what should happen when there is a car crash, there's no mention of differences. No mention of differences, yes? And yet the injuries are different. And also, as I said, the patterns of travel are different. Yes, so there's a really. I use this example to show that really you can go right from the basis of biology all the way to the behavior and all the way to sort of a public safety issues just by thinking how to apply the sex and gender dimension in your research. And there's evidence for all of that, so just need to go and look for it. Okay, so that is the evidence, and now I'm just trying to see whether I can show you how to deal with it when you're looking at your proposals. So first of all, I would say that it's good to have a nice conceptual framework as to how it all fits into the sections of the proposals. Okay, so the conceptual framework, so by being clear what is this problem that is being addressed, why is it a problem from a gender perspective, and then what are the main issues, what might be causing those issues, and what can be done, okay? And then there has to be obviously translation from the concepts. That all will be somewhere in the excellence, okay, section. Sorry. Yeah. So that would be in the excellence section, and then you have to connect it in what it says in the call for proposal, okay. And the calls for proposals, as we know, can be very, very hard to read and very complex. And one has to go through them many times, underlying different keywords to make sure that you actually are understanding what they're trying to say. And frequently, they want to say everything, and it's almost impossible to design a project that cannot deal with everything. But so I find it's quite useful to then use the method of theory of change and try to connect what the call says and what kind of impacts the Commission expects, and they also would mention some outcomes, and then to say what kind of activities we can do that produce output that will connect to these outcomes. So this is some things I've tried to work out for the project Inspire. Okay, it's just a really concentrates the mind and tries to make it sort of systematic connections across the project. The other thing we have tried to have done is for the SDGs. We've been working with UN Women to produce guidelines how to integrate gender perspectives into implementations of SDGs. That's really so. Basically, when people discuss implementation of SDGs, they usually use like 3 specific methods. They read the description of the SDG, and they look for keywords, and then they get experts, they improve the keywords, and they look to do the literature search, and maybe there are some models and some statistics, and they put it all together and produce a strategy for the implementation, which is not too dissimilar to looking at the Horizon Europe call and saying, what are the keywords in there? Can we talk to the experts for the topic, because we need to understand the context? Then we have to do the literature search to see what is the evidence there, because you have to give all the references. And then there might be some models already, models of behavior or models of some biological models. And there might be also some indicators and statistics. And I think one has to use all those methods together in order to kind of have a really strong arguments in the proposal. Elsevier has done quite a lot of work on trying to mapping the trends and gaps in knowledge, and quite interesting things that you can discover, because that you can discover which topics and which fields of science look at the gender. But you can also map out the keywords and see where there has been quite a lot of evidence and where there has been missing evidence. So if you're doing research and innovation project, that is sort of a useful thing, because you could actually claim that you are going to do research that will first identify where there are gaps and where there's a good evidence, and you could either address the gaps or you can actually build on the already available evidence. So that's, again, it's all available and accessible. There's a link here, there's a report. Language is very, very important, and it's evolving, because we had speakers at the last Gender Summit who were saying, you know, how we talk about gender and how we talk about sex has been changing, but the definitions that are now come from like 20 years back, and they are very much influenced by the feminist thinking. But I think one has to bring into it also the sort of a current scientific and biological thinking, because in the end, everything has to be measurable, okay? You have to actually have that evidence. So these are recent examples of, and of course, these days, the sexual orientation and identity. I find that if you put the word gender identity or sex, gender, and identity into Google now, most of stuff that comes out has got to do with trans issues and not like security issues, for instance. So that's but anyway, so these are critical things, and of course links to the gender innovation steps, where it says you have to look at the definitions and theories and okay, so there are also guidelines now for reviewers. It's worth to look at them, because of course the reviewers are going to be looking at your proposal. So they also will be informed how to look at the proposal. There are guidelines for authors and editors. Actually, these guidelines have been very influential and are being adopted by lots of journals and research funders. So again, it's good to then look, once you have drafted your first proposal, to get someone else to look at it and say, you know, so maybe just follow this particular guidelines to see, like, will they identify the obvious things that are missing? And there are now things published in various sources, but a lot of it to do actually with biological sciences, about specific methodologies. So this one is about increasing the scientific value of clinical studies by looking at sex, gender as variables. This one, collecting sex and gender data. This one is about essentials for investigators, again, sex and gender differences in research design. Okay, right. So I thought it was quite a good idea for this particular event to have this practice afterwards, because actually it was a very good practice for me to think, I can, the stuff that I talked about up till now, there's so many things to be said that, I could probably spend several days talking about it. But this was really good because I thought I'm going to see whether it's actually possible to how I would approach these topics. So I thought this was a really interesting study. This is it's the same, more or less the same people. How is patient-centered care conceptualized in women's health? They did a scoping review and then they looked at the policy. So this is a really good angle from a European Commission's point of view and Horizon Europe, because you produce evidence, and there's a huge amount of effort right now how policy can be improved through evidence. Okay, so there are lots of programs on that. So the interesting thing, and it will be very good justification for me, is on how to approach this, because basically they say despite international calls for strategies to reduce gender disparities in healthcare delivery and outcomes, this scoping review identified no studies that employed or developed a framework and no studies that involve solely women in exploring how to achieve this patient-centered care for women's health. Okay, thus primary research is needed to generate knowledge about PCCW models, processes, facilitators, challenges, interventions, and impacts. Most policies failed to recognize gender disparities or promote patient-centered care, recognize gender disparity as a mitigating strategy. So complementary strategies such as equipping policymakers with the evidence and tools required to develop PCCW-informed policies. I mean, that's, for me, that justifies having a project, yes, because there's a gap in knowledge, there's a need for a policy, there's a need for evidence, and it is part of this particular topic. Okay? But there might be other examples as well. This is another one I thought it could be really good. I don't know if you know, but the JRC has got a platform where they looked at the performance of the of the EU strategy on gender equality. Okay, so they have all sorts of indicators and a scoreboard that compares these indicators across different countries, and these are the indicators. And when you go to this website, you can click on the indicators so you will know what they are. So here is basically all the political representation by gender. And here are things like participation and higher education and so on. So the interesting questions could be, for me, is looking how these inequalities in health, especially for older people in different countries, compare to the gender inequalities in those countries, and to say, is there a connection between decision making at political and leadership level in health and in society, and the the capacity to address this health issues, and what is actually happening in health. Okay, so I feel that that could be attractive because it builds on something that the Commission has already funded, yes, and it also looks at a very specific evidence that where there are inequalities in health. There's also, I noticed, and on the list, there's an interesting topic about integration of data life cycle, various ways. Of course, human factors immediately strikes me as a good target, but there are many contexts that it could be done, especially all this collection of data, as I already mentioned, the one for the use through Facebook and using of apps, the one about using of the health devices that actually also send messages and data somewhere. And of course, it will be different across your own lifetime. The personalized medicine, I mean, lots of data. And this particular guidance on applying human factors and usability engineering in medical devices, including drug devices. This is this report here. They have a little model. There's no sex or gender in that thing, but they talk about user profiles where they mention gender, but also age, height, education. So lovely intersectional perspective. They talk about the user environment, so you have a nice contextual thing, so you could use compare different countries or different cities, or yeah. And training, again, that's how train the trainer or training. So, and also the connection to their gender balance, because there is I saw a paper saying, let's make gender diversity in data science a priority right from the start. So basically it says if there are no women among the people who analyze data, you're not going to get really same, as good a analysis as you could. Okay, there's another one that caught my eye, is the one about privacy preserving and identity technologies. And I thought targeting the high-risk AI system, and by this means basically the system that make automatic decisions that affect your own life and your, as opposed to, it's, as I said, I mean, if you go with Google, you find lots of LGBT stuff when you look at identity, but someone has to really make a search in a really good way. But this is finally Fundamental Rights Agency, which is European Union's agency, which does a lot of very interesting research I didn't know about, including in getting the future right, which sounds like a good topic to put in a title for the proposal. Getting the future right in the gender sensitive way or something like that. So they did, in this particular report, there are lots of things, including this lovely picture and some examples about the attitudes. So do people know how does AI automatic systems affect them, and do they have a way of saying, actually stopping it? So again, you know, a good thing to do specifically for focusing on gender. And they have also listed a whole lot of context where the automatic AI systems are very dangerous. So algorithms used to recruit human resources was found to generally prefer men over women. Online chatbots became racist within a couple of hours. I think that was a lot of machine translation showed gender bias. Facial recognition systems detect gender well for white men, but not for black women. Actually, there was a speaker on this in the last Gender Summit. Public administration use of algorithms to categorize unemployed people did not comply with the law, and a court stopped an algorithmic system supporting social benefit decisions for breaching data protection laws. So there are lots of possibilities there, looking from a gender perspectives and intersectional perspectives and a security perspective. So the other one I really found, I thought very interesting, is this study about privacy preserving breast cancer recurrence prediction based on homomorphic encryption and secure two-party computation. I'm sure Jörg knows what it means. But anyway, it basically means about using, I don't also particularly know what it means, but it is encryption and secure computation to do with privacy preserving, yes? So it's a big issue, but it could be put into all this, it talks about a specific thing about breast cancer, okay? So it's a very nice context. It is very important context. It affects women and men. It affects people in every country. It is a global issue. So it has got that also connection to standards. And if you look at all these examples I just put here of papers that talk about westernizing women's risk, breast cancer in lower income countries, increased risk of developing lung cancer after radiotherapy for breast cancer, benefits of harms of mammography screening, men less likely than women to survive breast cancer, so you can look at that and you think like, there is a good justification that obviously lots of men and women might get breast cancer, so they have to be screened and they have to follow some procedures and and lots of data is collected for them, and there might be insurance issues involved, and there might be all sorts of things involved if this information is not secure. So I thought that could be another quite a good case, and I think that is it. Yes, that is it. Sorry.
Thank you, Elizabeth, for such a nuanced and deep analysis. And I have two comments. First of all is, do you think that the European Commission, when evaluating, or the reviewers, when they evaluate the proposals, they understand the difference between sex and gender and how they are included in the analysis? Because I think that's a very important thing. When you use sex, is for biological issues and gender more for social issues. And I think perhaps this is not understood like this for everyone or for every scientist. And the second one is, since you and Gentic are in the Inspire project, do you think that we are going to see that the European Commission is going to ask for having an EDI or an intersectional approach in the following years as compulsory?
Okay, answer is to the EDI first. This is the direction we're going, okay? So it cannot these days talk just about sex and gender. You have to include diversity, inclusion, and so on. And it also applies in the European Commission as well. The influence comes from the gendered innovations, okay? So gendered innovation is the Commission's favorite project because they've been partly funding it for a very long time. And it has accumulated a lot of data. So when I was evaluating with the Horizon 2020, okay? If there was a team of evaluators, nobody would know what sex and gender means. Yes, we had to actually teach them in about 5 minutes what it means to the proposal we're evaluating. So that was really depressing. And the evaluation of the processes of Horizon 2020 assessments of proposals really was pretty depressing as well. That basically the project officers didn't know, the evaluators didn't know, the proposers who wrote the proposals made some blunt statements that were basically useless. So I think there was a lesson, lots of lessons were learned. And I think now what will happen is that everybody is going to be given this Gendered Innovation 2.0 report. It explains what is sex, what is gender, what is intersectionality, and it has got, 10 or 15 detailed case studies, okay? And I think everybody, certainly in the Commission, will have to look at that. And I think it's also going to be basic standard for the evaluators as well. Whether it's going to be properly applied, I don't know. But anyway, that is the step. It also was in the Horizon 2020, it said that projects, they had like 600 calls that were marked as gender was relevant, okay? So you would think, and in those, it said then that the proposals are going to be ranked if they included explanations of sex and gender. Actually, it was very difficult to do, yes, because if there are like 40 proposals, yes, and 5 or 6 scored during the evaluation the same level, at that point it's very hard for the group making the assessment which one should actually, because it talks about gender, should be chosen. Now everybody has to put in this evaluation, okay? So whoever is going to produce the best evidenced and best integrated explanation, I think is going to be the one that is going to win, because, and now is the time to apply, okay? Because as people learn how to do it, because in the next series, there'll be, of course, more knowledge about it. So I think, yes, I mean, we have moved on. We have moved on really long way since whatever it is, 10 years ago, and even since Horizon 2020. And people like Londa Schebinger, who has been a pretty driving force in actually influencing the thinking within the Commission on it, she does also now drives the thing we have to go away from sex and gender only, but also look at intersectionality, okay, and inclusion and diversity. So the whole thing became much, much more complicated. But at the same time, completely justified, okay? Because it's just not possible just to keep it like. So anyway, so I would say I'm positive on that. I think it should be much better. And I think there's going to be much more monitoring, not only because there are already projects being awarded that are going to monitor what's happening, but I think there's so much attention now on where the Commission is going to deliver on Horizon Europe that I think, yes. But I don't say just let's sit and do nothing. I really have to all look and monitor and make sure that it's actually the Commission does. But the Commission was aware that in Horizon 2020, they didn't do a very good job.
There's another question. Yeah.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I also have 2 questions. One is about most of the examples you mentioned have to do with the biological sciences, technology studies, but what about the social sciences? Do they also have all these gender biases? Have they done a better work of approaching them? Well, yeah. Put it on the table, and then well, if you want to reply to the first.
I do this first one, okay. Very, very good question, okay? But my feeling is that the social science comes very often from a tradition of a different scientific tradition, okay? And there's a great deal of influence and always reference to feminist arguments. They don't really work for most of the rest of the science, okay? Because the social justice argument, while it's very, very important, does not really translate very easily into impact and quality, okay? So, and I'll give you an example actually that actually bothers me a lot, is again what to do with the energy transition, okay? So we are in the process of a huge change going on because of going into the greener economies. There was a study initiated, I think it's called Set Plan. No, it was not that one. No, it might be, but no, another one. Anyway, it was a European Commission study. It looked at what social science and humanities can do to help energy transition and to identify the questions that have to be asked. So there were lots of experts from the 2 sciences looking at this. They identify 400 questions, prioritize 100 of them, yes. Gender just originally, in the original report, gender was only mentioned once. In a paper that was published I think in Nature, but anyway, you can find that, or I can send you the reference. Gender is mentioned a few times, but it's not the principal thing, okay? So in a sense, it doesn't mean that social scientists and humanities will immediately look at the social issues and say, where is the intersectionality in it? Where is the inclusion in it? So I think it really does depend who is it, I think, in the room, whether they come with the knowledge of gender and then they put that knowledge into whatever is being discussed, like what are the priority questions, or not. So yes, I mean, they should be there, and maybe also the Commission will specify whether gender is relevant and whether SSH is relevant, but not that somehow they have to be interconnected. So that interconnection is not made, and maybe in responsible research and innovation, I don't think even there is also kept separate. And as you've seen from the guidelines for stem cells, they look at ethics, but they don't look at the problem of the differences between between sex and gender. So, yeah, good question.
Thank you. And the second question, which is related, in fact, to your response, well, you were saying that all these frameworks, like the differentiation between sex and gender, intersectionality analysis, these all come from feminist studies. To what extent can we integrate feminist studies in Horizon Europe projects? Because it seems that I come from feminist studies, so we have the expertise, but I don't know if our expertise is valued when writing these projects. I don't know if we should kind of water down the feminist perspective to be more amenable to the requirements.
I would say it should be almost obligatory to include the social and humanities perspective, whether feminist perspective, I'm sorry, don't know, I just read the papers. I know that when we did GenSet and we had our science leaders, we only put in empirical evidence, okay? Because we just felt they are just not going to respond to the kind of argumentation that you find in papers that come from feminist studies. Yeah, it was my personal decision, yes. But I would say yes. I mean, it says in nearly every proposal, it says SSH, how is SSH integrated into it. But I would like some, like you, looking at this 100 questions or the 400 questions that these experts have produced for energy transition, and say, how do I read those questions from a gender perspective, okay? Or gender, EDI perspective. Yeah? Because frequently it talks about people and citizens and users. It's not really talking about who is it. It's a bit like SDGs. We'll talk about, leave no one behind, improve this and this for everyone. What do you mean? I mean, it might mean so many different things. And I think that we are really now at the stage that we really have to be very clear about the meanings, because the knowledge is then goes into society and it can help break the stereotypes and things if we are really clear what we're talking about. Yeah. So I don't really answer your question, but I'm completely with you on the need to kind of see how social science and humanities ways of analyzing things can be incorporated. Yes? It might be almost like a separate work package, yes, that would look at these different perspectives, gender, intersectionality, EDI, and feministics, and say we can have a framework, conceptual framework, that can connect these different ways of understanding. Yeah. And I think there's a lot of recognition now that we need to incorporate many different kinds of knowledge. Yes, we cannot just rely on empirical stuff. Okay, I think there is that trend. And in Germany, they had a big initiative to ask the citizens what is the most important question to them, research questions to them. I think 14,000 people responded, and I think they're still analyzing the data. So it's not citizen science. This is really tapping into citizens' appreciations or knowledge or understanding of the world and see what is the most important question to them. So I think there is that. I think the timing would be very good. Whether it fits to any of the calls for proposals, that's another matter.
So thank you very much. I think we will move on to the coffee break and then to the sessions. Thank you again very much, Elizabeth, for this very inspiring talk. And let's thank her again.
Thank you.